A true story. They locked Grandpa Peter in the house. Before leaving, the blonde woman approached his bed once more. She wants to make sure I'm really asleep, he thought, suppressing a smirk. She wouldn't fool him so easily. He had learned how to fake sleep perfectly. Days of practice while she was out of the apartment. He trained himself to keep his eyelids perfectly still, to stare at a single point without blinking while still seeing everything happening around him. They came every evening, staying until morning, acting like they belonged there. The tall man watched TV. The blonde woman busied herself around the house. They ate dinner. It looked like an ordinary family. They even brought a kid, a little boy. A perfect illusion, Peter thought. The child called them Mom and Dad, and called him Grandpa. They must have tricked him, Peter figured. One day, when they were alone, Peter tried talking to the boy. But the kid's confused expression told him. He had no idea what was really happening. Or worse. Maybe they brainwashed him too. Peter had no memory of how or when he was brought to this apartment. Had he walked in on his own? Or had they carried him inside, drugged and disoriented? One thing was certain. He had been here a long time. At first, he couldn't understand who they were or what they wanted. But after endless hours of thinking, it became clear. They had kidnapped him. And whoever they weren't good people. Why else would they pretend? The blonde woman called him Dad. The tall man called him Mr. Peterson. Good people wouldn't act this way. To be fair, they hadn't hurt him. Not yet. The blonde always called him to eat. For some reason, she always tried to take his hand. At first, she even filled a bathtub with water and insisted he take a bath. Peter saw through it immediately. She wanted to drown him, or worse, drop something electric into the water. So he refused, and he had a solid excuse. Why would a grown man like me take a bath in a stranger's house? She had sighed, put on a sad face, and eventually given up. Now she just turned on the shower and left him alone. Peter pretended to bathe, but he never let his guard down. He didn't trust the flimsy bathroom lock. Instead, he stood ready, watching, waiting. Then he would wet his hair, splash some water on the floor, and step out like nothing happened. By now, Peter had known for a while. They had kidnapped him. They wanted something from him. But what? That part still didn't make sense. The real problem? Peter couldn't remember anything. Not who he was, not where he lived, not even if he had a family. He was sure of one thing. If his memory came back, the answers would too. Whatever these people wanted from him, the key was in his past. But how could he unlock it? Was it drugs? Hypnosis? What had they done to him? Sometimes the blonde would casually ask if he remembered anything. She acted disappointed when he shook his head. But Peter wasn't fooled. He saw the flicker of relief in her eyes. She was glad he didn't remember. At night, when she and the tall man sat down to watch TV, Peter would settle into the armchair beside them. He pretended to doze off, but through barely cracked eyelids, he studied them. He listened carefully, every shift in their tone, every glance, every sigh. Then, during the day, he replayed it all in his head, again and again. It was all he could do, and really, what else mattered? If he could just answer one question. Who was he? That was the key. And once he found the key, the whole mystery would unravel. The thought consumed him, leaving no room for rest. But sometimes fear crept in. What if there were people out there, his people, who needed him? What if someone was waiting, suffering, wondering why he hadn't come home. The idea sent him spiraling toward panic. To keep from losing his mind, he forced himself to focus. First, he had to remember himself. Some days he almost had it. Flashes of recognition would dance just out of reach. Familiar sensations, hauntingly close but impossible to grasp. And then, as soon as he reached for them, gone. Vanished into the depths of his mind. But there was one face. A woman's. So familiar. Her name hovered on the tip of his tongue. Peter changed his strategy. If he could remember her, maybe he could remember everything. And then, one night, it hit him. Maria. His Maria. His wife. But for how long? Where was she now? If they had taken him, what had they done to her? What danger was she in? Peter knew. He needed something to trigger his memory. A street name. A familiar building. A scent that would bring it all rushing back. He had to get out. He had to. He had a purpose now. The world outside remained just as distant, just as quietly hostile. But his mind, the mind of a former mathematician, had finally kicked into gear. It started working through the possibilities, mapping out escape routes. One by one, plans formed. One by one, he discarded them. Each had a flaw. Each had an obstacle he couldn't overcome. Then one day, frustration broke him. For the first time, he cried. And the blonde was there. Masking her face with concern, she rushed to him. Oh, how sickening, Peter thought, to sit so close to the enemy, to depend on her while Maria, his Maria, could be out there, suffering. But hatred. Hatred was useful. It cleared his mind like nothing else. And then, suddenly, he saw the answer. The window. He would escape through the window. A strange calm washed over him, like wrapping himself in a heavy coat. Nothing else mattered now. He almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. They had no idea he had figured them out, and they had no idea what was coming. A thrill ran through him. That childhood excitement when you find the perfect hiding spot, one no one would ever think to check. Now it was time to play the game. Peter turned to the blonde. I'd like to take a bath. He saw the spark of excitement in her eyes, but he remained calm. For some reason, he knew. Tonight they wouldn't hurt him. Not yet. So he let her wash his hair with shampoo. Let her wrap him in the bathrobe he had always refused, and, for the first time, he ate dinner with an appetite. The blonde flitted around the kitchen, beaming. For a moment, Peter almost felt something like sympathy for her. Almost. But no. He shoved the thought away. He needed to stay sharp. This wasn't just about him anymore. Disaster waited for him at the window. As he opened it, his stomach dropped. The apartment was on the 5th floor. His hands shook as he frantically searched for bedsheets. She had hidden them. Somewhere. Stay calm. Stay focused. If he didn't escape tonight, it might be too late. Finally, he found them. Deep breath. One sheet. Tie it to another, then another. Secure it to the window frame, slowly, silently. No one could hear. He climbed out, gripping the makeshift rope. But then, the last sheet ended. 5 more meters to the ground. Too far. Too far for a man of 78. 78. The number struck him, and suddenly, so did everything else. His name was Peter Marshall, a retired professor. He lived with his daughter, Olivia, and Maria. His Maria. Maria was gone. Maria had died. Tears slipped down his weathered cheeks. His chin trembled. His grip faltered. One hand clutched the sheet, his last fragile connection to this world. Olivia stared at the candle, its small flame flickering, searching for answers. finding none. Maybe she should have nailed the window shut. Maybe she should have put him in a care home after the memory loss started. Maybe.